The hum of jet engines vibrated through the cabin of Horizon Air Flight 312. A midday hop from Dallas to Chicago. It was one of those crisp winter afternoons where the sky stretched clear and blue. The kind of day that made flying feel routine, almost boring. Inside the first-class cabin, the air smelled faintly of fresh brewed coffee and leather seats. Passengers settled in, some sipping complimentary drinks, others tapping away at laptops or scrolling through their phones. The soft clink of glassware and the murmur of low conversation filled the space, creating a bubble of calm above the clouds. Sam. Grayson stepped aboard just as the boarding call echoed through the gate. He was a wiry man in his early 60s, with a face carved by years of sun and hardship. His gray hoodie hung loose over a faded pair of jeans, the cuffs frayed from wear. His sneakers, once white, now a dull gray, scuffed the carpet as he moved, and he leaned lightly on a battered wooden cane, its handle worn smooth from use. A faint limp marked his stride, a souvenir from a helicopter crash in Iraq decades ago when he'd flown combat missions for the Air Force. To anyone watching, he looked like a guy who'd wandered onto the wrong plane. But Sam didn't care what anyone thought. He never had. He handed his boarding pass to the gate agent, a young woman with a practiced smile who barely glanced at him before waving him through. "Enjoy your flight, sir," she said, her tone automatic. Sam nodded, adjusting the strap of his small duffel bag, and made his way down the jetway. His ticket read 2A, first class. Window seat. He'd flown coach plenty of times in his life, but today he'd opted for comfort. Not that he'd tell anyone why. Sam wasn't the type to flaunt anything, least of all the fact that he owned Horizon Air, the very airline humming beneath his feet. The first-class cabin was half full when he stepped in. A businessman in a crisp suit, Tom Bradley, as his luggage tag would later reveal, glanced up from his Wall Street Journal, gave Sam a quick once-over, and went back to his reading. A woman across the aisle adjusted her designer scarf, her eyes flickering toward Sam's cane before darting away. Sam didn't mind the looks. He was used to them. He slid his duffel into the overhead bin, eased into 2A, and propped his cane against the armrest. The window gave him a view of the tarmac, where baggage handlers scurried like ants under the Texas sun. He exhaled slowly, settling in for what he hoped would be a quiet ride. That hope didn't last long. Karen Mitchell, the lead flight attendant, emerged from the galley like a hawk spotting prey. She was in her mid-30s, tall and sharp-featured, with a uniform so crisp it could have been ironed with a ruler. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, not a strand out of place, and her badge gleamed under the cabin lights. Karen had been with Horizon Air for a decade, climbing the ranks with a mix of grit and an iron grip on authority. She prided herself on keeping first class, exclusive, her word for it. To her, that meant no riffraff, no freeloaders, no one who didn't look the part. And Sam, with his scruffy hoodie and thrift store vibe, didn't fit her picture. "Excuse me, sir," Karen said, her voice cutting through the cabin like a knife. She planted herself in the aisle beside Sam's seat, one hand on her hip, the other clutching a clipboard. "I think you're in the wrong spot." Sam turned his head slowly, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were cold, appraising, already decided. "No mistake," he said, his voice low and even. "This is my seat." Karen's lips tightened into a thin line. She glanced at his hoodie, his jeans, the cane leaning against the armrest. Her gaze lingered on the sneakers, those damn sneakers, and her jaw twitched. "This is first class," she said, her tone clipped, like she was explaining something to a child. "I'll need to see your boarding pass." Sam didn't flinch. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the crumpled stub, and handed it over. "Here you go." Karen snatched it from his fingers, her manicured nails flashing under the lights. She scanned it quickly, her eyes darting over the details. Samuel Grayson, seat 2A, first class. The ticket was legit, printed on Horizon Air stock, barcode intact. For a split second, something flickered in her expression, doubt. Maybe, but it vanished as fast as it came. She thrust the pass back at him, her posture stiffening. "This doesn't add up," she said, loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. "You sure this is yours? Or did someone hand it to you?" The cabin went quiet. Tom Bradley lowered his paper, his brows knitting together. A woman 2 rows back shifted uncomfortably, her phone hovering mid-scroll. Sam leaned back in his seat, his hands resting on his lap. "It's mine," he said simply. "Paid for it myself." Karen crossed her arms, her clipboard tapping against her elbow. "Paid for it, huh?" She smirked, A sharp little sound that grated on the air. "Buddy, these seats go for $800 a pop. You don't look like you've got that kind of cash lying around." The insult hung there, bold and ugly. Tom cleared his throat, his voice rumbling from the next row. "Hey, lady, he's got the ticket. What's the problem?" Karen shot him a glare that could have melted steel. "Sir, this doesn't concern you. I'm handling it." She turned back to Sam, her patience thinning. "Look, if this is some mix-up, if you got upgraded by mistake, I can move you to coach. But you're not staying here." Sam's fingers tightened slightly around the head of his cane. The only sign he'd heard her. His face stayed calm, almost too calm, like a lake before a storm. "No mix-up," he said. "I'm staying." That pushed her over the edge. Karen's face flushed, her voice rising. "Sir, I'm not asking. These seats are for priority passengers, people who belong here. You're holding up boarding." She reached for his arm, her grip firm, and yanked him up. "Let's go." Sam stumbled slightly, his cane clattering against the seat. A gasp rippled through the cabin. Tom stood halfway out of his chair, his paper crumpling in his fist. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped. "He's not bothering anyone." Karen ignored him, her focus locked on Sam. "Out, now." She shoved him toward the aisle, his boarding pass fluttering to the floor. The cabin buzzed with tension. Phones were out now. Recording, whispers turning to murmurs. Jess Harper, a younger flight attendant hovering near the galley, bit her lip, her hands twisting nervously. She'd seen Karen snap at passengers before. But this was different. This was wrong. Sam steadied himself, picking up his cane with a slow, deliberate motion. He looked at Karen, his gray eyes piercing through her bravado. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice quiet but heavy, like a warning shot. Karen straightened, her chin lifting. "Damn sure. Move it, or I'm calling security." The cabin held its breath. Jess slipped behind the galley curtain, her fingers fumbling for the intercom. She didn't know who Sam was, but she knew this wasn't going to end well for someone. As Karen stood there, arms crossed and triumphant, the jet engines roared to life outside. The plane taxied toward the runway, oblivious to the storm brewing inside. The cabin of Horizon Air Flight 312 vibrated as the plane climbed into the sky, leaving Dallas behind in a blur of concrete and steel. Outside, the winter sun glinted off the wings. But inside, the air was thick with tension. Sam. Grayson stood in the aisle of first class, his cane gripped firmly in one hand, his gray eyes locked on Karen Mitchell. She'd just shoved him out of his seat, 2A, the one he'd paid for, and now she loomed over him, arms crossed, her face a mask of smug authority. The hum of the engines couldn't drown out the buzz of unease rippling through the cabin. "You're done here," Karen snapped, her voice sharp enough to slice through the recycled air. "Pick up your little ticket and head to coach, or I'll have you hauled off when we land." She pointed at the boarding pass lying crumpled on the carpet, a casualty of her earlier yank on his arm. Sam didn't bend to grab it. He straightened his posture as best he could, the faint limp in his left leg more noticeable now that he was standing. "I told you," he said, his tone low and steady. "This is my seat. You've got no right to move me." Karen's eyes narrowed. "No right? Buddy, I'm the lead flight attendant. I've got every right to keep this cabin in order." She stepped closer, her clipboard slapping against her thigh. "You don't belong up here. Look at you. That hoodie's older than half the crew. Now move it." The words landed like a punch, and the cabin reacted. Tom Bradley, the businessman in 3B, tossed his Wall Street Journal onto the tray table with a loud rustle. "Lady, you're making a scene over nothing," he said, his deep voice carrying across the rows. "He's got a ticket. Let it go." Karen whipped her head around, her bun so tight it didn't even quiver. "Sir, I suggest you mind your own business. This is my plane, my rules." She turned back to Sam, her patience evaporating. "Last chance. Get out of my sight." A murmur spread through first class. A woman in a cashmere sweater 2 rows back whispered to her husband, "She's losing it." Another passenger, a younger guy with earbuds dangling, pulled out his phone and started recording, the red dot glowing like a silent accusation. Jess Harper, the junior flight attendant, hovered near the galley curtain, her hands twisting the hem of her apron. She'd seen Karen chew out passengers before, rude drunks, loud talkers, but this was different. This guy wasn't fighting back. He was just standing there. Sam adjusted his grip on the cane, his knuckles whitening slightly. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice calm but edged with something hard, something that made Jess's stomach twist. "Check the ticket again." Karen snorted, A harsh sound that echoed in the confined space. "I don't need to check squat. I know a freeloader when I see one." She bent down, snatched the boarding pass off the floor, and waved it in his face. "This could be fake for all I know. You're not fooling me." That's when she crossed the line. Before anyone could blink, Karen grabbed Sam's arm again, this time harder, and shoved him toward the curtain separating first class from coach. He stumbled, his cane clattering against the wall, and hit the floor with a dull thud. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the cabin. Tom shot to his feet, his tie swinging. "Are you insane?" he barked. "You can't just manhandle people." The woman with the scarf yelped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Someone call the captain," she squeaked. The guy with the phone zoomed in, muttering, "This is going viral." Jess's eyes widened. She'd never seen Karen go this far. Her fingers fumbled for the intercom behind the curtain, pressing the button to connect to the cockpit. Captain, we've got a situation up front," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's bad." Karen didn't flinch. She stood over Sam, hands on her hips, chest heaving. "Stay down," she ordered, as if you were a dog she'd just disciplined. "You're lucky I don't have you cuffed right now." Sam pushed himself up slowly, using the cane for support. His hoodie shifted, revealing a glimpse of a faded tattoo on his forearm, an Air Force insignia. Barely visible under the cabin lights. He didn't say a word, just looked at her, his silence louder than any shout. The weight of that look made Karen falter for a split second. But she doubled down, pointing toward the back of the plane. "Go, now, before I make this worse for you." Tom stepped into the aisle, his broad frame blocking her path. "Enough," he growled. "You're assaulting a passenger. I don't care who you think you are. This stops here." Karen's face twisted. "Sit down, sir, or you're next." She turned to Jess, who'd peeked out from the galley, her face pale. "Harper, get security on the line when we land. This guy's outta here." Jess nodded weakly, but her hand hesitated over the intercom. She'd already alerted the cockpit. What more could she do? The captain's voice crackled through her earpiece a moment later. Low and urgent. "Ground crew's been notified. Someone's meeting us in Chicago. Keep it under control, till then." The plane leveled off at cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign chiming off. But no one moved. The tension hung like a storm cloud, heavy and electric. Passengers exchanged glances, some outraged, some curious, all waiting to see what happened next. Sam brushed off his jeans and leaned against the wall, his cane steady in his hand. "You're digging a hole," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Hope you're ready to climb out." Karen smirked, misreading his calm for defeat. "The only one in a hole is you. Pal, enjoy coach." She turned on her heel, striding back to the galley as if she'd won a war. Jess watched her go, then glanced at Sam. He didn't look angry, just tired. Maybe a little sad. She wanted to say something, to apologize, but the words stuck in her throat. 30 minutes ticked by, the cabin settling into an uneasy truce. Tom kept an eye on Sam, who'd stayed standing near the curtain, refusing to leave first class. Karen bustled around, handing out drinks with a forced smile, acting like nothing had happened. But the whispers didn't stop. The video was already bouncing around. Someone had uploaded it to X with the caption, "Flight attendant goes rogue on Horizon Air." Jess saw it on her phone during a quick break, her stomach sinking. This wasn't going away. Then the descent began. The captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth and professional. "Folks, we're starting our approach into Chicago O'Hare. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The plane tilted, the engines shifting pitch, and Karen's confidence seemed to waver. She darted a glance at Sam, who hadn't budged, his cane tapping lightly against the floor. As the wheels kissed the runway with a soft jolt, the cabin braced itself, the seatbelt sign blinked off, and the door hissed open. Footsteps echoed up the jetway, heavy, purposeful. Rob Evans, Horizon Air's COO, stepped aboard, his suit pristine, his face unreadable. 2 security guards flanked him, their radios crackling. Karen froze mid-step, her clipboard slipping an inch in her grip. Rob's eyes found Sam first. "Mr. Grayson," he said, his tone clipped but respectful. "You all right?" Sam nodded, brushing a speck of lint off his hoodie. "Been better." Karen's smirk vanished. Wait, what's going on?" Rob turned to her, his gaze cold as steel. "Karen Mitchell? You're about to find out exactly who you just kicked around." He raised his voice, loud enough for every passenger to hear. "This is Samuel Grayson, founder and owner of Horizon Air. And you, ma'am, just made the biggest mistake of your career." The cabin erupted, gasps, murmurs, a low whistle from Tom. Karen's face drained of color. Her clipboard hitting the floor with a dull thud. The storm had broken, and she was standing right in its eye. The cabin of Horizon Air Flight 312 fell silent as Rob Evans' words hung in the air like a judge's gavel. Sam Grayson, owner of the airline, stood near the galley curtain. His battered cane tapping lightly against the carpet. Karen Mitchell's clipboard lay abandoned at her feet, her face pale as the overhead lights. The passengers, still buckled into their seats, stared wide-eyed, some clutching phones that had captured every second of the chaos. The jetway door stood open, a cold Chicago breeze creeping in, but no one moved, not yet. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, her hands trembling slightly. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice cracking for the first time. "He didn't look like what?" Rob cut in, his tone sharp enough to slice through her excuse. He stepped forward, the security guards behind him shifting their weight, ready to act, like someone who belongs in first class. Like the guy who built this airline from the ground up. He gestured at Sam, who hadn't moved, his gray eyes fixed on Karen with a quiet intensity that made her shrink. Tom Bradley, the businessman from 3B, leaned back in his seat with a low whistle. "You're toast, lady," he muttered, loud enough for the front rows to hear. A few passengers smirked, others whispered, the tension breaking into a ripple of nervous energy. Jess Harper, still hovering near the galley, clutched her apron, her eyes darting between Sam and Karen. She'd known this would end badly, she just hadn't guessed how badly. Rob raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. "Everyone, stay seated, we're handling this." He turned to Karen, his expression unyielding. "Mitchell, step off the plane, now." Karen hesitated, her chest heaving. "Wait, just let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," Rob snapped. "You assaulted a passenger, the owner, no less. You're done." He nodded to the guards, who stepped closer, their radios crackling. Karen's shoulders slumped, but she straightened her uniform with a shaky hand, clinging to the last shred of her authority. She shot a glance at Sam, searching for something, mercy, maybe, but his face gave her nothing. Just that steady, unflinching stare. The walk down the jetway felt like a mile. Karen's heels clicked on the metal floor, each step echoing in the narrow tunnel. Rob followed, Sam trailing behind with his slow, deliberate limp. Passengers craned their necks to watch, some already uploading videos with captions like, "Flight attendant meltdown, biggest fail ever." By the time they reached the gate, a small crowd had gathered, ground crew, a gate agent, and a man in a dark suit holding a tablet. Karen's stomach dropped. She recognized him, David Torres, Horizon Air's legal counsel. They didn't stop at the gate. Rob led the group straight to a glass-walled meeting room just off the terminal, the kind reserved for emergencies. The door clicked shut behind them, muffling the hum of O'Hare's chaos, announcements blaring, travelers rushing past. Inside, the air was stale and heavy. Karen stood near the door, her arms crossed, while Sam eased into a chair at the table, his cane resting against his knee. Rob and David took seats opposite him, a stack of papers between them. David spoke first, his voice dry and professional. "Ms. Mitchell, you've got about 30 seconds to explain why you thought shoving Samuel Grayson out of his seat was a good idea." Karen swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I thought he was a stowaway, or a mistake. He didn't look like first class. I was protecting the cabin, keeping it orderly." "By assaulting him?" Rob interrupted, leaning forward. "We've got video. Karen, passengers recorded it. You yanked his arm, pushed him down, and told him to stay down. That's not order. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen." Her face flushed. I didn't know who he was. If I'd known." Sam finally spoke, his voice cutting through her panic like a knife. "That's the problem, isn't it?" He leaned back, his hands resting on the table. "You didn't care who I was. You saw a guy in a hoodie and decided I didn't belong. What if I'd been some regular Joe with a bad leg? Would that make it okay?" Karen's mouth opened, but no words came. David tapped his tablet, pulling up a file. 10 years with Horizon Air," he said, scrolling. "No major incidents until today. But this is a career ender. Assaulting a passenger, let alone the founder, violates every policy we've got." "I'm sorry," Karen blurted, her voice rising. "Mr. Grayson, I messed up. I'll apologize publicly. Take a suspension, whatever you want. Just give me a chance to fix this." Sam studied her, his expression unreadable. After a long moment, he sighed. You don't get it, do you? This isn't about me forgiving you. It's about you. You think a sorry fixes what you did out there? He tapped his cane on the floor. Real authority doesn't need to yell or push people around. It just stands there. You never learned that. Rob nodded. Effective immediately. You're terminated. No severance. And you're barred from working for Horizon Air or any affiliate permanently. He slid a termination letter across the table. Sign it, or we escalate this to legal action. Karen's hands shook as she took the pen. Her signature jagged on the page. David added, "This'll be reported to the FAA and industry boards. You won't fly again, not with us. Not with anyone." The room went quiet, the weight of her collapse settling in. Karen stared at the paper. Her breath shallow. 10 years, gone in an hour. She'd climbed from junior attendant to lead. Ruled the cabin with an iron fist. And now she was nothing. She stood, legs unsteady, and grabbed her bag. I understand," she whispered, more to herself than them. Sam watched her go, his face still calm. As the door clicked shut, Rob turned to him. "You didn't have to say much. She buried herself. She always was gonna," Sam replied, standing slowly. "People like that don't fall, they jump. Blank. Underscore, blank." Outside, Karen stumbled through the terminal, her uniform feeling heavy, foreign. The bustle of O'Hare swirled around her, families lugging suitcases. Pilots striding past, but she was invisible now. She reached the parking garage, the cold biting at her face, and slid into her sedan. The keys jingled as she fumbled them into the ignition, but she didn't start the car. She just sat there, gripping the wheel, staring at the concrete wall. Her mind replayed it all, the shove, Sam's fall, Rob's voice announcing who he was. She'd been so sure, so certain she was right. She'd spent years judging passengers by their clothes, their manners, deciding who deserved her respect. Sam didn't fit her mold, so she'd thrown him out, literally. And now? Now she was the one on the outside. A tear slipped down her cheek. Then another. She wiped them away, angry at herself for crying. But they kept coming. She'd lost everything, her job, her pride, her place in the sky. And the worst part? Sam hadn't even raised his voice. He just stood there, letting her arrogance do the work. She could have checked the ticket closer, could have listened, could have stopped, but she hadn't. Back at the gate, Sam stepped off the plane, Jess trailing behind. "Mr. Grayson, I'm so sorry about all this," she said, her voice small. "I should have done more." He smiled faintly, adjusting his hoodie. "You did enough, kid, don't worry about it." As he walked away, Tom caught up, clapping him on the shoulder. "Hell of a show. Man, she's gotta be reeling." Sam shrugged, his cane tapping the floor. "She'll figure it out, or she won't." He didn't look back. For him, it was over. For Karen, it was just beginning.